Serious, nurses and doctors have predicted. What's your weirdest, scariest paranormal stories that took place during work? Did a rotation in a burn unit. There are tons of stories that go around, but I'll share my favorite. A pimp lit one of his prostitutes on fire, and she immediately bear hugged him, causing them to both suffer pretty severe injuries. Unfortunately, hers included an inhalation burn. They both were being treated in the same ICU but on opposite ends. Weeks later she ends up coding and passes away. And after about 30 minutes, as things start to quiet down, the guy starts screaming from his room, "Get her out. Get the goddamn bitch out of my room." I'm an ICU nurse. A patient's son rang the hospital at 11 PM on a Saturday night saying he was sure his dad was dying. His dad had had a severe stroke and was doing okay. Recovery would be difficult, but he wasn't expected to die and was pretty stable at the time. I was looking after him and he was a lot of work because he would try to get up but couldn't walk, so he'd fallen a lot. The son really wanted to come in, even though it's way past visiting hours. But you know, I'll bend the rules in a good cause. I figured, what the heck, it's his Saturday night. Come on in and sit with your dad. Patient died about 2 minutes before the son walked in the door. It was like a switch was turned off. He just died. The last thing he said to me was, "Am I bothering anyone?" Full stop. I told him of course not. Even though he had some very frustrating behavior because of the stroke. The son just started crying and screaming. I knew it. Full stop. How the heck he knew? We were all a bit freaked out. I am a nurse in a hospital and my patient was a well-known card reader in town, not too unheard of in Louisiana. I had actually gone to her about 10 years prior and she was eerily accurate. While caring for her for a few days, I walk into her room and she is unresponsive. She had been very lethargic all day, but now she was out. Her daughter is at the bedside and is trying to wake her up. I sternal rub her and inflict pain with no response and a very thready pulse. I call a rapid response. This woman then wakes up randomly and was full of energy within a 30-second span. She told me she was dead and watching me in the room the whole time. Knew exactly what happened. She said God told her it wasn't her time and sent her back. She went home a couple days later and she is still doing card readings. She's in her late 80s. Ike. One of the rooms we have is obviously having something of a haunting. A man in a gown gestured one of the techs to come in. She went in and he was gone. 1 week earlier a female PT was asking to get a different room because a man wouldn't leave her room. We just thought it was some sort of delirium. Multiple others have seen him too. I was working at night and one of the patients died while I was in the room. We tried everything to revive this person but it didn't work, so after doing the papers and everything I went to another place in the hospital, and I swear to God that this patient who I saw dead touched my right arm. I think that I have never cried that much in my life. Maybe it was their way of saying thanks for trying. I used to work in a nursing home as both a CNA and an LPN. And while nothing too crazy happened, there were definitely things that happened out of the ordinary. I remember one time after someone had died, I was cleaning up her body and the door to the room swung wide open even though it had been firmly latched. Nobody was there. It gave me the creeps. There were instances of furniture being moved, lights turning on and off by themselves, and toilets randomly flushing by themselves as well. I also remember I had one resident one night who asked me to make sure I closed the door to the closet that was at the end of her bed, and she told me that when it was open that woman kept going in and out of it all night and it kept her awake. A ward I worked on once had a patient who was a psychic medium as a patient. We had a bit of a laugh with her as she was on the ward for a while. She'd had a stroke which affected her mobility, and she would do readings for the staff etc. from time to time. I took it all as just a bit of fun until one evening when she pressed her nurse call buzzer and told us to go check on a patient in a side room as he was dead. We went to check and sure enough found that the gentleman had died. Later on we asked our psychic patient how she had known, and she told us she had seen him coming out of his room obviously distressed. She realized he had died and had to explain to him what had happened and help him to pass over, go to the light. Now I am not a believer, but that gave me the creeps. She killed the patient. Student nurse here. I once had a patient say, do you ever feel the chill whenever you're on the computer? Don't worry, it's just a nurse who worked here a long time ago. You should just talk to yourself one night and explain the computer and how it stores all the info and teach her about it. See what happens. Maybe she'll eventually go away. She sounds friendly though. Worked in a nursing home long-term facility for multiple years. Personally hadn't experienced anything too crazy apart from mystery call lights, call bell system going off. No buttons lit up, no rooms lit up. System would have to be reset from the electrical room to clear it. Hearing doors close shut. Toilets flushing. Faucets running. These were by no means commonplace. Other staff had some more direct experiences though. Apparently in one hall a little girl would occasionally be seen walking. This had been reported by multiple staff as well as patients. A staff member was sitting out in her car during night shift when some woman who knocked on her window and quickly disappeared. The next day she was discussing this out loud with the oncoming shift when someone pulled out a picture from old files based on the description provided. Apparently, it was a match to a former patient that had passed away at least 10 years before that staff member was hired. I had a 6-year-old who fell from a tree and had a significant head injury. She didn't respond to voice commands or painful stimuli, but she was having a conversation with someone. The only part I could clearly hear was when she said, "Well, I know. But I don't want to be dead." She then went unresponsive. Happily the neurosurgeon was have to get her in the OR in time and take care of her epidural bleed. She survived with mild deficits and came to see us after being discharged. She didn't remember the conversation at all. Back when I was a paramedic in Oakland, I was taking care of an elderly gentleman in the back of my ambulance. He looked up into the upper corner of the ambulance and said, "It's okay Lulu, I'll be with you soon." His daughter was with him and told me that Lulu was his wife who died 20 years earlier. A few minutes later he went into cardiac arrest and passed on. I worked as a med tech at an assisted living facility. One day a resident, I'll call her Margaret, suddenly passed away and her family left all her belongings in the room that night, including her pendant, to call the staff for help. The next night Margaret's neighbor called the staff because someone was talking in the room next door and keeping them awake. We brushed the resident off knowing that Margaret's room was empty. About an hour later Margaret's pendant started going off from her empty apartment. I was the only one willing to go turn it off, so I walked into the room and it was freezing cold in the middle of summer. The air conditioning was off. Suddenly the bathroom door slammed as I was turning off the pendant light. I locked the door and ran back to the nurse's station. We forced one of the older male staff members to go check out the entire room and he claims the door was still locked when he got down there and no one was in there. My aunt is a nurse and told me some stories, but this one stuck with me. There was an old lady who insisted on being strapped down at night in her bed. She told my aunt that there was a dark figure that was trying to grab her and take her out of the room, where she would die. My aunt and other nurses obliged, and for the next few nights she would check on her and it would look as though someone was trying to pull her from the bed randomly while she slept. My aunt is then off and whoever is this lady's nurse does not strap her down at night. Nurses found the old lady dead, laying on the floor by the door. Her hand stretched out past the door and into the hallway. My mom used to work as a night nurse in the burn unit at a hospital in Dallas, TX. She told me that people would always talk about how the burn unit was apparently haunted. She wasn't really sure whether or not to believe this until a little girl came into the unit with horrific burns. The little girl did not always have parents stay the night with her, so my mom would try to check up on her pretty often when she worked. One night, my mom asked the girl if she ever got scared at night. The little girl responded, "No. I don't get scared because an old woman comes to read to me every single night and sits beside my bed while I fall asleep." This shocked my mom because there were no older women working in the burn unit at night and she would usually be the only person on duty during those times. It isn't that scary, but she always recalls it being one of the craziest things that has ever happened as a healthcare worker. Reading these comments during my night shift alone in the canteen wasn't one of my best decisions. I'm not in human medicine, I'm a licensed veterinary technician, but our emergency hospital is haunted by a gentleman we refer to as Gerald. The clinic was built for us, we didn't take over another business. We've all seen him. Usually around 4 AM. And sometimes we see him at the same time. Once, I'd taken radiographs of a patient with my co-worker and I thought my doctor had been standing outside the door. But just walked away. I saw the figure walk away. I called out for the doc. Since she'd just walked away. And my co-worker laughed at me and said she was still in the office. It was just Gerald. He also meows like a cat from our comfort room sometimes. We have 2 clinic cats and they're always with us and accounted for when we hear him. It's also obviously a person meowing when we hear it. We have cameras. Nobody is there when these things happen and are seen. He's just a part of the clinic. I am a medical student. Back when I was doing internship at an obstetrics hospital, I usually ended my night shift at around 2 AM. As I walked back to my quarter, I would occasionally see a baby girl, probably 5-7-year-old, running and playing in the hall. When I brought this up with one of my professors, he just told me to turn a blind eye. According to him, they were just playing and would do no harm if you pretend you didn't see them. Edit. We've actually had a room sprinkled with holy water several times by our pastoral care due to the amount of deaths we've had in the same room. We had a little boy come by ambulance and was a toddler. His parents had put him to bed and he was with a cold. Nothing serious but developed tragically into more and he started coming in and out of consciousness. We had to do a rapid intubation and he ended up passing away a few days later. Before mom and dad made it to hospital he kept talking about his baby sister Hannah. Not soon after we had to life-saving measures. I was distraught because I had a son similar in age and a daughter named Hannah. Fast forward. Approximately 2 years later. Family comes in with sick infant. They remembered me. I did once I recalled their story, and I was their provider again. Their daughter's name was Hannah. It startled me and I recalled with clarity the boy speaking of his sister, whom I assumed was alive and at home. Nope. She wasn't even conceived yet. Baby. Thankfully. Went home with parents and doing well, but I'll never forget that. Little boy and his baby sister. Hannah. My mom used to do in-home care. Not exactly a nurse. One day she was at a man's house feeding him his supper. She cleaned up. Made sure the man was set up and said goodbye before leaving. He seemed perfectly normal to her. She walked down the front driveway to her car. She got a weird feeling. She kept walking until a random huge gush of wind stopped her in her tracks. She tells me she heard someone telling her to go back. She turned back and went inside to find that the man had passed. If she had left he probably wouldn't have been found for a couple days. I know somebody who is a nurse. She told me a story about how this woman was unconscious when came into the hospital and when she woke up she was hysterical. And cried non-stop just begging to be taken outside. So eventually they did. When she was outside she calmed down and said she has the ability to see the dead and they knew she could see her, so they surrounded her bed all shouting for her help. The woman could have been lying or crazy, but that's a cool story and I was so intrigued when I heard about it. We were on a night shift. Sitting around the nurse's station and talking about weird things that had happened. One of the HCAs was in a side room once doing last offices. And the lights flicked on and off twice. Calls bells going off when there was no one about to press them. Hearing a cough when there was no one there, etc. etc. As we were talking, there was a pause in the conversation and very clearly we heard typing from the keyboard at the doctor's desk, which was just round the corner from us. I stepped round the corner to see who it was, as usually the doctors would check in with us before sitting down. Just to say hello and to see if there were any jobs needing down. So I looked round the corner after hearing the keys being tapped as if someone was typing. Only to see no one there. Was very freaky and we had to change the convo as we all felt too uncomfortable after that. I used to work hospice and had one patient who was on her deathbed. The family had all gathered around her to say goodbye. Up until the last remaining family member showed up. This patient remained resting in bed. Before anyone could say something, this patient sat straight up, eyes wide open, looked and pointed to every single family member there like she was counting them. Immediately after this, she fell back in her bed and had died. Her daughter told me that she wasn't the most pleasant person and wasn't surprised that the patient would keep tabs on who showed up before she kicked the bucket. Seems kinda weird to keep a grudge into the afterlife. One day a patient had to go to the X-ray, which he was taken to in a wheelchair. About 5 minutes later, the notification from the patient's room went off and me and my favorite work buddy went to the room. As we stepped in, we saw that the room was empty and the windows were closed. Even the bed was missing in which the patient did not go to the X-ray. We both told a fully examined nurse and even she had no idea where the bed went. At the end, we had to fill the room with another bed. My mom works in a hospital. During Hurricane Maria, the building suffered a lot of damage and administration chose to close a whole floor instead of fixing it. It used to be the pediatrics floor. When people go up there, they can clearly hear babies crying even though the floor is completely abandoned and the floor below is for adult patients only. It has been caught on video. I am a labor and delivery nursery nurse. Mostly it's call lights alarming from rooms that are completely empty. Sometimes it would coincide with APX, the time of death on another unit. Be the anniversary of a fetal demise. However, my creepiest, we have a button to push after a delivery to play a lullaby over the PA system announcing a birth through the hospital. One night no one was even in the same room as the button and the lullaby started playing. It did that twice, then we unplugged the entire thing. It still went off once more that night. And again a few days later despite being entirely disconnected. That was a few years ago and no one ever heard it do that before or since. I was working as an RN in LTC. There was a long-term very elderly patient whose daughter was a regular visitor. She was extremely difficult and none of the staff's efforts were good enough. According to people who knew her in the community, that was how she was with everyone everywhere. The daughter was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer and became a patient on the same floor as her mother. I had worked with people at end of life dozens of times and was well versed in providing comfort care. No matter what meds we gave. Emotional support was provided along with every holistic intervention we came up with. She was persistently agitated. When I asked her what was wrong, she said, "I know I'm going to hell. I've been an asshole to everyone. I'm going to hell. Full stop." The look of fear on her face was like nothing I've seen before. We were able to manage her physical pain, but I don't know that we were ever able to manage her emotional distress. It was heartbreaking. This is probably going to get buried. When I was a nursing student up on an ICU floor, I was hanging antibiotics in my patient's room when I heard an audible "hey." I turn around and there is no one else in the room. Mind you, my patient was intubated and sedated, so there's no possible way it was them. It was a woman's voice as well, so I thought it was my preceptor. I go back out to the nurse's station and I asked my preceptor if that was her in the room trying to catch my attention. She told me no, and I've never seen someone's eyes get so big. Apparently the room I was in has had the most paranormal sightings and activity out of all the rooms on the unit. Sightings as in shadows sitting in the corner of the room, voices being heard and curtains being flung violently across the railings. No one ever told me about this room prior to my preceptorship, so it just added to everyone's beliefs it was haunted AF.